Increasingly, people experiencing homelessness are older adults over the age of 50 years. It is estimated that the percentage of the homeless population that is over the age of 50 has increased almost fivefold in the last 30 years. Many of the landmark studies documenting the rise of homelessness among older adults have been conducted by UCSF Professor of Medicine Margot Kuchel. Documenting this demographic trend, however, is just one step in a complicated process that is necessary for real policy and systems change. We're going to discuss efforts to provide housing to older adults in one Bay Area city, Oakland, from the perspective of four people who have played critical roles in the process. First, we have Mayor Libby Schaaf, UCSF Professor of Medicine Margot Kuchel, Tamika Moss, founder and CEO of All Home, Kevin Fagan, who is a reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle.
What moves people are stories and not data. What we try to do as researchers is figure out the data and then find the stories that are examples of that. Because if you just go with stories without data behind it, you're going to come up with the most visible story, which is often the most stigmatized one.
I love the frame of the data-informed stories because it just brings to life what folks are going through. And then it provides, as I said, a pathway for advocates and policymakers to do things differently.
How you push a policy change really does have to do with communication, where you go from kind of research evaluation to story to policy change. And it often goes in that order. So we've all been learning about like how Stockton did their guaranteed income demonstration. And they are running, a randomized control trial. They're doing that. But they also are periodically just doing progress reports, right? Aggregating data, like this is what we know. But they also picked some members that are in the demonstration. They pulled them out of the randomized control trial, and they are the storytellers. And so they actually are part of the evaluation design, but they are purposely pulled out so that their stories can be shared in real time. And I think that is brilliant. And the last example I want to give is Margot's amazing study around racial equity. She starts by analyzing and documenting racial disparities, particularly in how different homeless interventions and services are not serving our Black unhoused, and how they are so overrepresented in our homeless population. But she takes that data and then starts getting the stories, then starts not just looking at numbers, crunching numbers, but actually listening to people. And Margot, the stories, the examples, the testimony that you capture both illustrates the impacts of systemic racism and discrimination. This idea that it really, people need to go to bed at night behind a locked door with their partner, their pets, their possessions, and their privacy. Those 4 Ps, that became a policy. Started with data, it was understood through stories, and it became policy.
It's a hard topic to talk about because people have given up hope. I think it's a hard topic to talk about because sometimes the easiest stories to tell are to blame the individuals, right? That's what's super visible when you walk down the street.
We need data, but we also need to change the narrative. Data sticks when it is illustrated by a story. And I really believe one of the most powerful changes to policy are going to be these stories. And the narrative that it is solely driven by addiction, illness, by mental health failure, that narrative is very strong. And so to see the data that Margot created that really just compellingly demonstrates that this is a poverty problem. This is a systemic problem. This is not a personal failure problem. This is not an illness problem. In fact, poverty becomes an illness problem. Her data shows that so clearly and compellingly.
This story had real leg to it. It advanced the thinking on this. And that's the kind of thing you want to do as a journalist, is advance the thinking by showing reality, not just saying your opinion. Get good numbers together, get some real compelling human examples of it together, and to cut right to the chase.
You know, the thing about data is the community already knows. Data just validates most often what they're already experiencing. So it gives people permission to believe them, to actually make investments and policy decisions based on what folks who are experiencing this crisis and those who work most closely with them are already aware of.
I like pushing the agenda forward for discussion on the subject of homelessness, rather than just doing stories on sad people in the streets that don't lead to better thinking about solutions. And what I like about Margot is she doesn't mess around. She gets right to the point. She gives me the goods. I says, I don't need a sell job. I'm not selling shoes here. I'm trying to do real stories.
We as researchers have a real problem with jargon, and we feel like it makes us smarter or something, but all it does is make our message convoluted. And I think when you use jargon, what you do is you allow for the easier messages to actually, to take hold. It's easier to think about what I call like the poops and needles story of homelessness, as opposed to the deeper story of this is a problem of systemic racism, income inequality, and poverty.
What makes her research and her work unique is that she actually works with you. Her research team and the Institute aren't just doing research in a vacuum. They're integrating their work, they're partnering with community members and community-based organizations, and they're making it accessible. You know, so much of what I appreciate about how Margot does her research is that she speaks in plain language. She shares her information with a variety of stakeholders, whether it's the folks, the seniors themselves, all the way up to our governor. And so I think having that sort of dexterity in your messaging and people really understanding how the research not only translates to the human stories, but then it gives a roadmap for how policymakers and community-based organizations can do their work better. Time matters. When we're trying to move policy within a legislative cycle in Sacramento, I can't wait 2 years for a study. I mean, I can't, maybe I have to, but I'd love the Cliff Notes. I'd love to know, what is that executive summary going to tell? It's like Kevin, he says all the time, like, give me the facts. What is it going to tell me? Deduce it. So how do we expedite without, it compromising the integrity of the research?
That is our reality. Your policymakers are not given the time to actually engage in the kind of contemplative process that produces good policy. And maybe that's a system flaw, but I'm just being very honest with you about what our lives are like. And so make it easy for us, like, be persistent, never assume we've read anything. And try and get literally in front of our faces with a face-to-face meeting.
You find a way to tell these complicated data stories with sort of personal stories. And I think you come down to 3 or 4 key messages, and don't try to get more than that across, so that your data-informed stories can sort of rise to the top and can perhaps outweigh some of the more sexy but perhaps less accurate stories. When we do research like this, our goal is to influence us. I learned recently from a colleague this week, I love this expression, influence the 3 Ps: policies, programs, and perceptions. And that's pretty much what we're trying to do. And I see those 3 things as related. I love publishing in peer-reviewed medical journals and public health journals. I think it's really important to be rigorous. I love doing it. But to be honest, the people who are most important for those 3Ps do not read those journals. And so to reach them, we have to find a way to take what we've learned and publish in those journals and disseminate it more broadly. We seek any opportunity we have to talk to audiences, whether it's in a church basement or a huge lecture hall. We have worked to develop relationships with policymakers so that we are invited to give testimony. Really, however we can reach the people who actually are the change makers, who can actually impact the changes, that's who we want to reach. On one hand, with research, you need to play the long game and, be patient and keep repeating, like staying on message and like keep repeating it over and over and over again until it sticks. And there's a role for that in terms of sort of changing perceptions long term, sort of the moving, turning the ship around. But there's also this desperate need that I don't think researchers do a great job of sort of rapid cycle, not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And what can we do quickly to come up with a decent answer? It may not be like the gold standard RCT, wait 5 years and find the answer, but recognizing that all of these actors are moving quickly to change programs and policies. And if the choice is no data or something a little bit short of the most perfect data, I'm going to go with something a little bit short of the most perfect data. But in order to, as researchers, to even be in part of those conversations, you've got to be right there in the mix.
Government needs a lot more data in our decision making. If it's really important, figure out a way to get a half-hour meeting with the decision maker and bring them the cliff notes, bring them the high level, whatever the top line, and then bring them the policy suggestions. And if it's me, I'm going to be like, yeah, we're going to do that.